Hello everyone, welcome back to another video of Gas or Ass, where I prog your builds and rate them if they're worth using for CHIME, ganking, or boss raiding. Since you guys liked the series so far, why not continue? So for today, we'll be using a build from Rogors where he made me a Shadowcast Alloyed Inheritors with Chilling, which is meant for CHIME and boss raiding, so we'll be trying this build out. Also, I have big news. We now have a Discord server. This is where I'll be rating the builds starting today because I have too much people requesting their builds. So, make sure to join the Discord in the link below if you want to get your build rated. If we reach 150 members on the server, we'll be doing a 500 Robux giveaway. It may seem small, but I'll give away more in the long run. So once again, join the server link below and subscribe if you want to see more videos like these. So now we'll go straight to the The build is finally done. It only took what? 2 days to finish. Anyways, I forgot to tell you that the build will be in the description as well. Make sure to try it out. Anyways, we'll be moving on to CHIME because I have nothing else to say. I forgot to tell you about the updated rating. He was right about this build being good at CHIME. The build does a lot of damage, because it's shadowcast obviously. This build has a ton of combos too, but I think that the Crypt Blade would be a bit more suitable than the Alloyed Inheritor with the Chilling Enchant. But he did say the build is mainly focused on this weapon, because you can catch opponents off guard by proccing Chilling, then waiting for them to dodge, then use Clutching Shadow, which could be easily countered. But overall, this build gets 0.9 stars. Now it's time to go ganking. Anyways, this build does well at ganking too. There's many mantras to use and overwhelm opponents from, but I don't see any mobility at all from this other than Shadow Assault, where I pointed that in the last video that there's other mobility mantras that are levels better than this. But overall this build is pretty decent for ganking. This gets 0.8 stars. It's just lacking mobility, that's all. And now finally, boss rating. Anyways, I forgot to record any boss rating footage, so we'll just go straight to rating this. Well, for the category, it obviously does a lot of damage, because again, it's shadow cast. This build can also tank hits BQs. Most of the mantras have bloodless gems on them, and overall this build has good crowd control because of some mantras here that's obviously for boss rating. So overall, this build gets 0.93 stars. Anyways, this build does wonders when it comes to PvPing in these three categories. Even in the depths, it has some talents that can be useful in these kinds of situations, but people can still void considering you only have one mobility mantra. But the high damage output makes up for it, so I'll give you a star for depths viability. Well, the moment you have been waiting for. Overall this build gets, drumroll once again please, 3.63 stars, which means this build is officially yes. Well, once again, I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like and subscribe because I put 1000% of my effort into these kinds of videos. It'd really make my week. Join the Discord server, and once again, thank you for watching.